CTV News Political Commentator and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair, and thank you very much for weighing in. I'm curious to see what you'll be, watching for in this, and gender parity and diversity among them. What are your thoughts on that?
I am also going to be looking for renewal. I mean, there's an old saying that when what you're doing doesn't work, do something else. So Mr. Trudeau's gone to the well twice now and come back with a minority government. And he's going to have to show that he gets the message from Canadian voters, and that would include a lot of renewal. I'll look in particular at the climate file. So that would include natural resources and environment. I wouldn't be surprised to see Minister Wilkinson, who's right now in environment, I wouldn't be surprised to see him move over to natural resources, because he knows the jargon well, he knows the industries well, and he's a very solid minister. Then Mr. Trudeau could do something which would be really bold and take one of Canada's best known and most respected environmentalists, who's languishing as heritage minister. His name is Stephen Guilbeault. And if indeed Mr. Trudeau puts Guilbeault over to environment, that would be on the eve of the Glasgow conference. It would be a really strong signal that Canada is finally going to start being a proper player with regard to climate change.
Yeah, and what about defence? Harjit Singh, I mean, it's been a hot seat, and do you think he'll move him?
Well, I think that Minister Qualtrough is an extraordinary person and an incredibly strong minister, and she would be amazing. So Carla Qualtrough is top of mind for that job. There are two other women, because I am presuming that Mr. Trudeau is going to put in a woman at defense. You could think of Mélanie Joly, although there are so many other files that she's been working on that you would love to see finished, like the language file. And of course, a lot of people will talk to you about, with good reason, Anita Anand, who did sterling work during the pandemic. So those are three possible choices amongst the women in cabinet. But again, if they reached out, if they went for people who were able to deliver on some of the many promises Mr. Trudeau made, I think he might do better this time around. You know, Jean Chrétien is anything but an anti-Trudeau, but he had some serious criticism of the tendency of the Trudeau Liberals to make promises and do very well in terms of communicating them, but not do so well, Bev, when it came time to actually accomplishing what they had promised. So I think that, again, they should be listening to an old hand like Mr. Chrétien, who only wants them to succeed, and try to do things a little bit differently this time around.
And what about, I mean, if there are sideways movements, so cabinet ministers who already kind of have had a cabinet post, so they're halfway up to speed, I guess, but depending on their new portfolio. What about those that are new faces and trying to get up to speed for this, minority parliament coming up November 22nd? How does a brand new face jump into a cabinet role?
Well, on the first part, the ones who are halfway into cabinet, that's fair enough for some of them. But I think that some of them should be halfway on their way to becoming ambassador to Belgium, to doing something else, because it's not because you were in cabinet before that you automatically get a ticket to go back in. Mr. Trudeau and the people around him have to look objectively at their performance, and not just whether or not they're stalwarts who have been good people with Mr. Trudeau, but whether or not they've actually gotten the job done. So you can think a couple of people who have been there for very long, who would be able to maybe move on to something else. With regard to the new ones, don't forget that almost all of them have some government in the House. They know the language of Parliament. They know how the structures of public administration work, and many of them would be able to do well. You also want to make sure, as you mentioned at the outset, more diversity. And, you could think that the LGBTQ people would have more of a place in cabinet, and I think that that's pretty well being announced so far, that Mr. Trudeau will move in that direction. So there are expectations on many different levels. You also want to make sure that you have enough people who can speak both English and French, but you don't have to be from Quebec to speak perfect French. Somebody like Julie de Bruzen from Toronto Danforth is fluent in French, and she's also a very experienced parliamentarian by now, having been elected 3 times in that riding. Joel Lightbound, Quebec City. Again, perfectly bilingual, young, full of energy and drive. Those are the types of people I'm going to be keeping my eye on to see if they make it in.
Okay, Tom Mulcair, CTV News political commentator and former NDP leader. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
All the best, Bev. Talk to you soon.